The late August sun hung heavy over Marietta, Georgia, casting long shadows across the neatly trimmed hedges and manicured lawns of the Crestwood townhomes. Kendrick Mossley stepped out of his unit, 412B, his flip-flops slapping softly against the pavement. In one hand, he carried a stainless steel thermos filled with iced hibiscus tea, its condensation cool against his palm. Tucked under his arm was a dog-eared copy of The Spook, who sat by the door, its spine creased from countless readings. Sundays were sacred to Kendrick, not for their predictability or quiet, but because they were his. A brief pause in the grind of deadlines and the looming pressure of the work week, they offered a rare chance to breathe, to exist without expectation. The walk to the community pool was short, familiar. He passed the faded "No Loud Music" sign, its edges curling from years of humidity, and the patch of grass littered with neon water guns abandoned by the neighborhood kids. The air carried that late summer thickness, a weight that clung to the skin, but a faint breeze made it bearable. Kendrick chose a lounge chair near the deep end, set his thermos on the small table beside him, and opened his book. For 20 minutes, the world was as it should be, the soft rustle of pages, the occasional splash of a distant swimmer, the hum of cicadas blending with the warmth of the afternoon. He adjusted his sunglasses, sipped his tea, and let his shoulders loosen. Monday could wait. Then he saw it, a black and white patrol SUV crawling past the pool gate. It slowed, reversed, and stopped. 2 officers stepped out, their movements deliberate but unhurried, as if they had all the time in the world. Kendrick's shoulders tensed, his fingers pausing on the page. He closed the book softly, marking his place, and sat up straighter. The taller officer, badge glinting in the sun, approached first. "Afternoon," he said, his hand resting casually on his belt. "Mind telling us what you're doing here?" Kendrick blinked, his voice steady despite the sudden knot in his chest. "I live here, just enjoying the pool." The second officer, pale with sharp features and eyes that didn't blink often, stepped closer. "Can we see your ID?" His tone wasn't a request. Kendrick reached into his bag, pulling out his driver's license and the community-issued keycard he'd been given when he closed on his townhouse in April. "Sure, I've got my keycard too. Is there a problem?" The taller one, Officer Trent Halley according to his nameplate, took the cards and glanced at them. "We got a call," he said, his voice flat. Someone reported a suspicious individual hanging around the pool area. Kendrick's jaw tightened, but he kept his tone even. "Suspicious how?" Halley didn't answer. Instead, he handed the cards to his partner, Corporal Bryce Fenwick, who examined them with exaggerated scrutiny, turning the key card over as if it might reveal a hidden flaw. "You said you live here?" Fenwick asked, his eyes narrowing. "Which unit?" 412B. Kendrick replied, "Bought it in April. I've got my deed at home if you want to walk over." Fenwick raised an eyebrow, his lips curling slightly. 412B, huh? That's not usually the profile we see for that address. The words landed like a jab, polite but pointed, carrying an accusation Kendrick had heard too many times before. He exhaled through his nose, keeping his hands visible. "Look, officers, I'm not trying to make trouble. I'm just out here reading, that's it." Halley flipped through a small notepad, his fingers lingering on the pages. "You got any guests? Anyone else supposed to be meeting you here?" "No, just me." A pause followed, heavy and deliberate, the kind of silence that spoke louder than words. Kendrick felt the weight of their stares, the way they stood just a little too close, their postures relaxed but invasive. From the second-floor balcony across the courtyard, Tessa Brindley watched. She wasn't close enough to hear every word, but she didn't need to. She knew Kendrick, not well, but enough. They'd chatted about their dogs, the traffic on Roswell Road, the best Thai takeout in town. Now, leaning against the railing, her phone in hand, she hovered her thumb over the record button. Something about the scene, the officer's casual dominance, Kendrick's controlled stillness, didn't sit right. Fenwick handed the key card back, his movements slow, deliberate. All right, just doing our job, but he didn't step back. He scanned the pool area as if waiting for Kendrick to slip up. You understand, right? Hallie chimed in, his tone almost conciliatory. It's not about you. We just have to check when we get calls. Kendrick stood now, his book still in hand, his thermos sweating on the table. I understand you're here because someone thought I didn't belong. His voice was calm, but the words cut through the air. Neither officer responded directly. Down the street, a woman walked her golden retriever past the pool gate, barely glancing their way. Kendrick noticed, and so did Tessa. He didn't raise his voice, didn't gesture or point. Years of experience had taught him that volume didn't make people listen. It often made them stop. Instead, he looked Hallie in the eye. Did the caller say what I was doing that made them uncomfortable? Hallie scratched his neck, his notepad still open. They just said there was a man they didn't recognize sitting by the pool. Looked like he didn't live here. No mention of threats, arguments, any kind of disturbance. Then I'm just a guy sitting by the water, reading a book and sipping tea, Kendrick said, his tone measured but firm. Fenwick clicked his pen, the sound sharp in the quiet. Sir, we don't make the calls. We just respond, and right now we're responding. Kendrick's hands stayed visible, his posture unchanged. I understand, but what I'm saying is, I've lived here for months. I've paid my dues like everyone else. If someone can call the cops on me for that, then what exactly am I allowed to do? The air tightened. Fenwick took a step closer, his boots scuffing the concrete. You don't need to get defensive. I'm not being defensive, Kendrick said, his voice steady as stone. I'm being real. Hallie raised a hand, his tone shifting to de-escalate. All right, sir, let's not escalate things. Can you confirm for us again? Do you live alone? Anyone else in the residence? Kendrick exhaled slowly, his patience thinning but intact. I live with my sister. She works nights, won't be home until this evening. No guests, no noise, nothing illegal. Just trying to enjoy the place I pay for. Fenwick scribbled something in his notepad, his pen moving with purpose. Then he looked up. Can you take us to the unit? Kendrick blinked. Right now. If you don't mind, Fenwick said, though his tone suggested it wasn't optional. He did mind. Every instinct told him to push back, to ask why they needed to follow him into his home when he'd already provided proof. But he also knew the cost of saying no, the way refusal could twist into resistance in the wrong hands. From her balcony, Tessa pressed record. She couldn't hear every word, but she saw the shift in Kendrick's posture. Calm, yes, but tired, like a man carrying a weight he shouldn't have to. She zoomed in slightly, catching Fenwick's step forward. The way he loomed into Kendrick's space, not aggressive but deliberate, asserting control in a way that felt more about power than procedure. Mom? Her teenage daughter, Mira, called from inside. Hang on, Tessa replied, her eyes fixed on the scene below. I need to film this. Kendrick shook his head, his voice still even. I'm not comfortable letting you into my home when I haven't done anything wrong. Fenwick squinted, his lips parting slightly. "Then, how do we know you really live there?" Kendrick pointed to his ID, his key card still in Fenwick's hand. "Because my name matches the address. Because I showed you my pool access card. And because I know how many damn parking spaces come with the unit." Hallie shifted his weight, his expression unreadable. "Look, you seem like a reasonable guy. Let's just be clear, we're trying to verify your presence. That's it. No one's accusing you of anything." "But you are," Kendrick said, his voice low but sharp. "You just won't say it outright." The words hung there, heavy and true. Hallie's mouth tightened, but he didn't respond. Then, from across the courtyard, a voice broke the tension. "He lives there." Tessa stood at the edge of her balcony, her phone still raised. "That's Kendrick Mossley, Unit 412B. I see him walking his dog every morning at 6:30. He's lived here since April." The officers froze, their heads turning toward her. Fenwick's voice carried a warning. "Ma'am, please stay on your property." "I am on my property," Tessa snapped, her tone unyielding. "And I'm filming this because I've seen enough of these videos to know how they end." Kendrick glanced up, his eyes meeting hers for a brief moment. He gave the smallest nod, a silent thank you. That moment, the neighbor, the camera, the exposure, shifted the air. Hallie's posture softened, his voice suddenly professional. "All right, Mr. Mossley. I think we're good here. Appreciate your cooperation." Kendrick didn't respond. He sat back down, opened his book, and stared at the page without reading. The officers lingered for a few awkward seconds, their authority deflated, before turning back to their SUV. As they pulled away, the engine's low hum faded into the cicada's drone. Kendrick leaned back, closed his eyes, and let the sun press against his skin. His afternoon was over, but the questions it raised burned brighter than the Georgia heat. Back at his unit, Kendrick set his bag down and poured the last of his tea down the sink. The air conditioning clicked on, a soft hum that did little to cool the frustration coiling in his chest. It wasn't anger, not yet. It was something slower, deeper, like a bruise forming under the skin. He'd felt it before, the subtle tap of indignity repeated until it became a kind of violence. His phone buzzed, 2 texts from his sister Alina asking about the pool, and a missed call from an unknown number, likely the HOA again. He ignored them all, then came a knock, 3 sharp taps, polite but insistent. He checked the peephole, Tessa. He opened the door, and she didn't wait for an invitation to speak. "I recorded everything," she said, holding out her phone. "I figured you might want it." Kendrick blinked, caught off guard. "Seriously?" "Yeah," she said, her voice firm but kind. "I thought they were pushing too hard. You didn't do anything, and they wouldn't let it go. It didn't sit right." He took the phone and played the video. The footage was grainy but clear enough. Him standing, arms controlled, the officers hovering too close, Fenwick's pen clicking, Hallie's notepad flipping. It captured the tension, the unspoken assumptions, the way Kendrick's calmness was a shield he shouldn't have needed. When it ended, he looked up. "Thank you, really." Tessa shrugged, but her eyes were steady. "You shouldn't need someone watching you just to be treated like a neighbor." They stood there for a moment, the weight of her words settling between them. "If you ever need someone to back you up with the HOA, or file a report or anything," she added, "I'm here." Kendrick nodded, slower this time, something shifting inside him. "Appreciate that." She turned to leave, and he stood at the door, still holding her phone, its weight heavier than it should have been. The moment passed, but the fire it sparked didn't. That night, Kendrick couldn't sleep. He lay in bed, arms folded behind his head, staring at the ceiling as the wall clock ticked, a cheap thing he kept meaning to replace. The silence of the house was oppressive, broken only by the echo of the day's events. Fenwick's squinting eyes, Hallie's fake neutrality, the way they'd looked at him like he was a puzzle piece that didn't fit. It wasn't just the pool incident. It was the HOA passive-aggressive emails about prop. Open gates, sent the day after he'd held one for a delivery driver. It was the neighbors who pulled their kids closer when he walked Bruno, his goofy pit mix who'd rather chase a butterfly than a person. It was the grainy photo of someone else's trash bin blamed on him. The landscaping crew's odd questions about his yard. The handwritten note on his windshield telling him to keep the volume down after 12 minutes of jazz. He got up, the clock glowing 1:47 a.m., and opened his laptop. The screen's light stung his eyes, but he didn't care. He created a folder labeled Pool Incident Raw and transferred Tessa's video. Then he opened another, Pattern, and began sorting. Screenshots of HOA emails, photos of his patio after baseless complaints, texts from the landscaping crew, that windshield note. Each file was a brick in a wall he hadn't wanted to build but could no longer ignore. This wasn't about one afternoon. It was about a life where existing quietly was never quite enough. At 2:00 a.m., Alina came home from her nursing shift, her keys clattering into the bowl by the door. She found Kendrick at the kitchen table, typing. "You're up late," she said, rubbing her neck. "Couldn't sleep." He replied, his eyes fixed on the screen. She glanced at the video paused on his laptop, her expression softening. "Oh, it happened again." He nodded, his jaw tight. "2 officers showed up today, said I looked suspicious sitting by the pool, didn't believe I lived here, pressed me for ID, asked to come into the unit." Alina closed her eyes, muttering, "God," then she sat across from him. Tessa recorded it. Good thing she did. He said, a half-laugh escaping, "This one's worse than the trash notices." She leaned on the counter, arms folded. "So what now?" Kendrick paused, his fingers hovering over the keyboard. "I don't know. I've got everything documented, but it's like you stack it all up and still wonder if it's worth pushing back. If you say something, people accuse you of stirring the pot. If you stay quiet, they get to write the story for you." Alina reached across the table, her hand brushing his. "You already know the answer." He looked at her, the weight of her words settling like a stone. "Yeah, I do." But knowing wasn't the same as doing. Kendrick stared at the files on his screen, each one a reminder of the invisible line he'd been told not to cross since he was a kid. His father's voice echoed in his mind from a long ago stop in Fayetteville. "You don't get to mess up. You give them a reason, they'll write your story without you." Now, decades later, Kendrick felt that same warning, sharp and heavy. He didn't want trouble, but trouble had found him. And maybe, just maybe, it was time to write the story himself. By morning, the weight of the previous day hadn't lifted. Kendrick stood in front of the bathroom mirror, toothbrush dangling from his mouth, staring at his reflection. He didn't look different, but he felt it, exhausted, not from lack of sleep, but from carrying the expectation of calm in a world that kept testing it. He showered, dressed, made coffee, but when he reached for his keys and saw the pool bag by the door, he froze. That short walk to the lounge chairs used to be his peace. Now it felt like stepping into a spotlight, every move scrutinized. He left the bag where it was. Instead, he took Bruno for a walk along the back trail, where the woods buffered the neighborhood from the outside world. Bruno bounded ahead, sniffing roots and chasing stray leaves, oblivious to the tension his owner carried. Kendrick let him lead, let the quiet of the trees pull him away from the eyes of Crestwood. But as they looped back toward the community, he noticed the shift. Mrs. Carson, who usually waved while watering her plants, turned away before their eyes met. The couple from Unit 305, always quick with a smile, kept their heads down. Word had spread. Tessa's video, shared anonymously by her friend to a local advocacy group, had hit the HOA private Facebook group and beyond by 10,000 a.m. It had been shared over 300 times, each repost a spark in a growing fire. Kendrick hadn't posted it himself, hadn't written a single word online, but the video spoke louder than he ever could. Back at his unit, he found 2 letters slipped under the door. The first was from the HOA, a bland notice. "We are aware of a recent incident involving law enforcement and a resident. Please remember to treat our community members with respect and kindness." It was hollow, a checkbox of civility. The second was different. No return address, just tight block letters on plain paper. "Don't bring attention to yourself. We all just want to live in peace." Kendrick stared at it, his pulse steady but his mind racing. He folded it twice and tossed it into the trash. He wasn't surprised, not anymore. He called Tessa. "I saw the post," he said when she picked up. "I didn't expect it to move like that." She sighed. "It wasn't me. I sent it to a friend who works with the Community Justice Group Indicator. She asked if she could share it anonymously. I said yes. Maybe I should have asked you first." "No," Kendrick said. "You did the right thing." There was a pause. "You okay?" she asked. He hesitated, then told the truth. "Not really." "You shouldn't have to carry this by yourself," she said, her voice low but firm. He appreciated that more than he could say, but part of him had learned not to lean too hard on others. Too many times, concern faded when the moment got inconvenient. Still, Tessa's gesture, her willingness to act, planted something in him. That evening, he sat on his balcony with Bruno curled at his feet, watching the sky shift from pink to gray. He thought about his father, about that stop in Fayetteville, about the way his dad had stood tall despite the fear in his eyes. You don't get to mess up. Kendrick had lived by that rule, but now he wondered if playing by it had ever been enough. By the next morning, he'd made up his mind. He poured coffee, sat at the kitchen table, and opened his laptop. The pattern folder stared back at him. Screenshots, emails, photos, all timestamped and catalogued. He opened a new email, subject line, "Formal complaint regarding incident on August 13, 2025. He wrote not as an angry man, but as one tired of not being believed. He kept it factual, time, place, officers' names, the exchange at the pool. He attached Tessa's video and mentioned Mr. Fry, a neighbor who'd overheard the whole thing and offered to vouch for him. He read the email 3 times, each word deliberate, before hitting send. It wasn't relief he felt. It was like lighting a match in a room full of paper. Whatever came next, he was ready. The morning after Kendrick Mossley sent his formal complaint, the air in Crestwood townhomes felt heavier, as if the humidity had thickened overnight. He stood at his kitchen counter, the coffee maker gurgling, while Bruno, his pit mix, sprawled across the linoleum, snoring softly. The laptop sat open, the sent email still on the screen, its words stark and unyielding. Kendrick hadn't slept much, not because of the email itself, but because of what it represented. a line drawn, a refusal to let the pool incident dissolve into the quiet acceptance he'd been conditioned to offer. He sipped his coffee, the bitterness grounding him, and glanced at the pool bag still untouched by the door. The walk to the lounge chairs felt like a distant memory, a ritual tainted by suspicion. Outside, the neighborhood moved as it always did. Sprinklers hissed, a jogger's sneakers slapped the pavement, and the faint hum of a lawnmower echoed from the far end of the complex. But something had shifted. Kendrick felt it in the way Mrs. Carson, watering her azaleas, avoided his gaze when he stepped out to check the mail. He felt it in the hurried steps of the couple from Unit 305, their usual smiles replaced by a downward glance. Tessa's video, now circulating beyond the HOA private Facebook group, had cracked the veneer of Crestwood's polished normalcy. By noon, it had been shared over 500 times, picked up by a local advocacy page, and retweeted by a community organizer in Atlanta. Kendrick hadn't asked for the attention, but it was here, and it carried a weight he wasn't sure he wanted. Back inside, his phone buzzed. A text from Tessa. "Check the HOA group. It's a mess." He hesitated, then opened the app. The private Facebook group, usually filled with complaints about parking or reminders about recycling schedules, had erupted. Comments piled up under a blurry screenshot of the pool video, posted by an anonymous account. He could have just shown his ID and moved on. "Why make it a big deal?" one resident wrote. Another countered, "If it were me sitting there, no one would have called the cops. Wonder why that is." A third, "This community has always been welcoming." "Don't let outsiders twist that." Kendrick scrolled, his thumb pausing over a comment that stung. He didn't look aggressive, but he didn't exactly cooperate either. He closed the app. It wasn't just words. It was exposure, raw and unfiltered, revealing the fault lines beneath the neighborhood's welcome home signs. He didn't respond online. He'd learned long ago that arguing in comment sections was like shouting into a void. People heard what they wanted to hear. Instead, he opened his pattern folder, adding a screenshot of the group's thread to the growing collection of evidence. Each file was a reminder. The HOA email about propped gates, sent after he'd held one open for a delivery driver. The photo of someone else's trash being blamed on him. The landscaping crew's odd request to double-check his yard. Small moments, maybe, but they stacked like stones, heavy and deliberate. A knock at the door broke his focus. Bruno's ears perked up, but he didn't move. Kendrick checked the peephole. Tessa again, this time holding a folded piece of paper. He opened the door, and she stepped inside without waiting for an invitation. "They sent me this," she said, handing him the letter. It was from the HOA, printed on official letterhead but thin on sincerity. "We have received reports of inappropriate conduct and unauthorized video sharing. Please refrain from actions that disrupt community harmony." The words were dressed up, professional, but the message was clear. "Sit down, stay quiet." "You serious?" Kendrick asked, scanning the page. "Yep," Tessa said, crossing her arms. "I filmed from my own balcony. Didn't break a single rule. But you know how this works. They want people to shut up." "You gonna fight it?" "Already did," she said, a small grin breaking through. "Forwarded it to my cousin, who's a lawyer. She's better with words than I am." Kendrick smiled, the first real one he'd felt all day. "I like your style." She tilted her head, her expression softening. "This place might look polished, but it's got cracks, and now they're showing." He nodded, handing the letter back. "Yeah, and once cracks appear, you either patch them or they spread." Tessa left, and Kendrick sat back at the table, the letter's words echoing in his mind. He opened his laptop again, pulling up the complaint he'd sent. No response yet, but he hadn't expected one so soon. The Marietta Police Department's Office of Internal Affairs wasn't known for speed, especially not for complaints like his. He thought about his father's warning again, "You don't get to mess up," and wondered if sending the email had been a mistake. Not because it wasn't true, but because truth didn't always guarantee listeners. His phone buzzed again, this time a call from a number he recognized, Tessa Murrell, an old college friend who now worked in community advocacy in DeKalb County. He picked up. "I saw the video," she said, her voice sharp with purpose. "Didn't even realize it was you at first." "You good?" "I'm all right," Kendrick said, leaning back in his chair, "as all right as you can be when someone calls the cops because you dared to relax." "You filing a complaint?" "Already did." "Want some backup?" He paused, the offer catching him off guard. "What kind of backup?" "Well," Tasha said, "we can start with pressure. Media doesn't always listen, but if we get a few more voices around you, things might start moving. Not everyone cares about one guy being harassed, but people care about policy." Kendrick hesitated. "I'm not trying to be some kind of headline." "I get that," she said, "but this isn't just about you. You know how many people this happens to, who don't have a video, don't have a Tessa on the balcony." He didn't answer right away. She was right. He'd seen the stories, heard them from friends, from his father, from strangers in passing. The same script, different names. "You already started the fire," Tasha added, "might as well make it count." He agreed to meet her the next day. That evening, he and Alina sat on the balcony with takeout containers and quiet music playing from her phone. The air was warm, the sky streaked with orange. For the first time all day, things felt halfway normal. Alina looked up from her noodles. "You talk to anyone?" "Yeah, Tasha. She wants to help with the complaint." Alina nodded, chewing slowly. "That's smart." "I don't want to make it bigger than it is," he said. "Too late," she replied, her voice soft but firm. "It's already bigger. You didn't make it that way. They did." Kendrick sipped his water, his eyes on the courtyard below. A few porch lights glowed. A dog barked faintly in the distance. He wondered if the neighbors who'd watched silently during the pool incident would speak up if pressed. He wasn't counting on it. By Wednesday, the story had broken free of the neighborhood's bubble. Metroview Journal, a mid-size Atlanta area blog known for tackling community justice issues, published a piece, "Man Harassed by Police While Sitting at His Own Pool. Neighbor's Video Tells a Different Story." The article quoted Kendrick's complaint, linked Tessa's footage, and called out the HOA tepid response. Within hours, the comments section was a battlefield. Supportive voices clashed with defensive ones, some questioning why Kendrick hadn't just cooperated. Others pointing out the obvious racial undertones of the call. Kendrick read the headline, skimmed the first paragraph, and closed the tab. He didn't need to see his life dissected online to know what he'd felt. At the grocery store that afternoon, a man in the produce aisle squinted at him. "You the pool guy?" he asked, his tone more curious than hostile. Kendrick gave a tired smile and kept walking. At the dog park, a young woman nodded at him, a quiet acknowledgement like they shared a secret. Later, at his usual coffee shop, the barista slipped a note with his order, "Keep standing tall." The support was quiet, scattered, but real. Back in Crestwood, though, the air was different. Inez Shipley, an HOA board member who rarely spoke beyond pleasantries, stopped him outside the mailroom. "I watched the video," she said, her voice low. "I'm sorry, this place has problems, always has." Kendrick nodded, surprised but grateful. "Appreciate that." She glanced around as if checking for eavesdroppers, then walked away. Her words lingered, a small crack in the neighborhood's facade. But online, the HOA Facebook group was less forgiving. "Why are we attacking our officers for doing their job?" one post read. "This is being blown out of proportion," another claimed. Kendrick stopped reading when someone suggested he'd been aggressive. It wasn't about logic, it was about comfort, people clinging to a version of Crestwood where nothing was wrong. Tasha moved faster than the HOA. She connected Kendrick with a civil rights attorney in Roswell, a woman named Carla Nguyen who specialized in local government complaints. Together, they drafted a second letter to the Marietta Police Department, this one more detailed, attaching Tessa's video, a written statement from Mr. Fry, and screenshots of the HOA attempts to silence both Kendrick and Tessa. By Thursday, the city issued a notice. Officers Halley and Fenwick were on administrative leave pending review. The language was careful, routine procedure, non-punitive, community trust matters, but the message was clear. Pressure worked. Kendrick stared at the announcement on his phone, sitting in his living room with the blinds half closed. Bruno snored on the rug, oblivious. Kendrick didn't cheer or call anyone to celebrate. He just sat there, the weight of the moment settling in. He hadn't asked to be the face of anything, but here he was, caught in a story bigger than one afternoon. That afternoon, another knock came. Not Tessa, not the mailman. A local news reporter, Rowan Yates, holding a mic, a cameraman behind her. "Mr. Mossley," she said gently, "we were hoping to ask a few questions about what happened over the weekend." Kendrick hesitated, his arms folded. "Why?" Rowan gestured slightly, her voice earnest. "Because a lot of people saw that video, and I think they're waiting for you to say something." He didn't invite them in, but he didn't shut the door either. Stepping onto the porch, he kept his voice steady. "I already said what I needed to in the complaint." "I understand," Rowan said, "but sometimes these stories come across differently when you hear the voice behind them." Kendrick looked down, then back up. "Fine, you want a quote. I'll give you one." He paused, choosing his words carefully. "I was just trying to relax. Someone decided I didn't look like I belonged, and instead of asking me, they called the cops. The cops didn't ask either. They assumed. That's what this is about, assumptions. It's about how quick people are to protect their comfort, and how slow they are to protect someone's dignity." Rowan lowered the mic, visibly moved. "Thank you." "No problem," Kendrick said. "Just do something useful with it." The interview aired that night on Channel 12, a 3-minute segment sandwiched between stories about gas prices and the county fair. It was short, but it hit hard. By morning, Kendrick's inbox was flooded. 30 messages, some from strangers thanking him, others from old classmates, one from a woman named Loretta Pug. "They did that to my nephew last year. He's still afraid to walk alone at night. Thank you for not letting this slide." But there were others, colder, warning him to pick his battles, or reminding him that communities have long memories. He read them all, deleted none. The HOA, meanwhile, sent a community-wide bulletin, carefully worded to avoid names. "We are aware of an incident involving residents and law enforcement. We are committed to reviewing our bias and safety protocols." It was corporate, vague, a placeholder for accountability. Then came the meeting notice, taped to Kendrick's door like a summons, Emergency HOA Assembly, Saturday, 10:00 a.m. Clubhouse Lounge. He stared at it, his fingers tracing the edge of the paper. He didn't want to go, but staying away felt like letting someone else finish his story. Saturday morning arrived too quickly. Kendrick threw on a clean polo and pressed jeans, arriving at the clubhouse early. The lounge was already buzzing, not with excitement, but with a strained tension that hung like smoke. Chairs were arranged in uneven circles, coffee cups clutched tightly, smiles forced. Tessa waved him over, her jean jacket slung over a sundress, her phone ready with the video cued. Mr. Fry sat near the front, arms crossed, his expression unreadable. A few others, strangers from deeper in the complex, gave Kendrick silent nods. For the first time, he realized how many eyes had been on him, quietly watching. The HOA board sat behind a fold-out table. Inez Shipley, who'd apologized days earlier, scribbled on a notepad. Beside her was Trevor Lang, the HOA president, a man whose khakis and boat shoes screamed early retirement. Today, he looked haggard, his eyes shadowed. He tapped the mic, the feedback cutting through the murmurs. "Good morning. Thanks for coming on short notice. I'll keep this brief." A cough from the back interrupted, followed by scattered chuckles. Trevor pressed on. "We've all seen the video. I want to start by saying we hear the concerns. No resident should feel unsafe or unwelcome in their own home." Kendrick leaned forward, waiting for the inevitable but. Trevor continued, his voice careful. "We recognize that some of our policies and assumptions may not reflect the kind of inclusive environment we want this neighborhood to be known for." It wasn't much, but it was something. Then Tessa stood, her voice cutting through the room. "Are you going to issue a formal apology to Mr. Mossley?" Trevor shifted, glancing at the board. "We're reviewing all the steps that led to the incident." "That's not an apology," Tessa said flatly. Murmurs rippled through the room. Inez raised her hand, her voice steady. "I'd like to suggest we form a community panel to revise the neighborhood watch protocols and improve training around bias." Nods followed, cautious but present. Then, a surprise. Beatrice Rowan, a retired teacher who'd lived in Crestwood since its first brick was laid, stood up. Her voice was strong, unwavering. "I remember when the Jeffersons moved in across from me in '97. People said the same things back then, that they didn't belong, that things would change, and guess what? They did, for the better. We're not going backward." A few people clapped, the sound tentative but real. Kendrick took a deep breath, then stood. The room quieted. "I didn't ask for any of this," he said, his voice calm but resonant. "I was just trying to enjoy my weekend. I'm not here to shame anyone, but I do expect to be treated like a neighbor, not a question mark." No one interrupted. He continued, his words deliberate. "I hope we're not just here to talk, because I've got better things to do than relive the same moment every black man I know has lived 10 times already." He sat down, the room exhaling collectively. The meeting stretched on proposals, arguments, promises of follow-ups, but Kendrick's words lingered, a challenge no one could ignore. As people filed out, Tessa caught his eye. "You said what needed saying," she whispered. He nodded, but inside, he knew this wasn't the end. It was just the part where people had to decide which side they were on. The days after the HOA meeting carried a different weight in Crestwood townhomes, not louder or quieter, but raw, as if the neighborhood had been stripped of its usual pretense. Kendrick Mossley walked Bruno along the back trail, the late August heat giving way to the first hints of fall. The air was still thick, but the breeze carried a sharpness that promised cooler days. Bruno bounded ahead, sniffing at roots and chasing a stray leaf, oblivious to the undercurrent of tension that followed Kendrick like a shadow. Neighbors' glances were no longer subtle. Some met his eyes with a nod. Others turned away, their silence louder than words. The video, the meeting, the news segment, they'd torn open Crestwood's polished exterior, and what lay beneath was messy, human, and unavoidable. Kendrick's inbox was a battleground of its own. Messages poured in. Support from strangers, gratitude from people who'd lived similar moments, and colder notes warning him to let it go, for the sake of community peace. He read them all, his finger hovering over the delete button, but never pressing it. Each one was evidence, a piece of the larger pattern he'd been cataloging since that Sunday by the pool. The HOA bulletin, promising to review protocols, sat on his kitchen counter, its corporate vagueness a reminder of how change was often promised but rarely delivered. Yet something felt different now, not finished but started. The question was what came next. Tuesday brought a call from the Marietta Police Department's Office of Internal Affairs. The voice on the line was calm, rehearsed, a woman named Officer Daniels. "Mr. Mossley, we'd like to schedule a follow-up interview to walk through your statement, clarify the sequence of events, and ensure your account aligns with our preliminary findings." Kendrick leaned against his kitchen counter, Bruno dozing at his feet. "Fine," he said, "but bring a notepad. I'm not guessing my way through it." Daniels paused, then agreed to meet the following day. Kendrick hung up, his jaw tight. He didn't trust the process, not fully, but he wasn't backing down either. That evening, he met Tasha Murrell at her office in downtown Decatur, a converted bungalow with peeling paint and posters of civil rights marches lining the walls. The Keurig in the corner sputtered uselessly as Tasha handed him a bottled water. "You made the right kind of noise," she said, her voice warm but direct. "Didn't want to be anyone's symbol," Kendrick replied, sitting across from her cluttered desk. "Symbols aren't chosen," she said, leaning forward. "They happen when truth collides with exposure." He glanced at the folders stacked beside her, each labeled with a name, a case, a story that hadn't made it to a news segment or a viral post. "This ever exhaust you?" he asked. Tasha smiled, weary but resolute. "Every day, but I rest when I win." Outside, storm clouds gathered, heavy with the promise of August rain. Kendrick stepped onto the porch, letting the wind hit his face. For a moment, he wasn't a man under scrutiny, just a man watching a storm roll in. But the moment passed and the weight returned. He thought of his father, of that stop in Fayetteville years ago, the way his dad's hands had stayed steady on the wheel despite the fear in his eyes. "You don't get to mess up." Kendrick had lived by that rule, but now he wondered if the real mistake was staying silent too long. By Wednesday, the Metroview Journal article had spread beyond Atlanta's borders, picked up by a few national blogs. The headline, "Man harassed by police while sitting at his own pool," was blunt, the video embedded below it even blunter. Comments ranged from outrage to defensiveness, some calling for the officer's dismissal, others insisting Kendrick had escalated by questioning them. He didn't read past the first few. The story wasn't his anymore. It belonged to everyone who saw it, interpreted it, weaponized it. At the dog park, a woman he didn't know gave him a quiet nod, her eyes carrying the same weary recognition he'd seen in Tasha's. At the coffee shop, the barista slipped another note with his order, "You're not alone," small gestures, but they anchored him. Back in Crestwood, the neighborhood was a mixed bag. Inez Shipley, the HOA board member, waved to him from her porch, her smile cautious but genuine. Others, like the couple from Unit 305, still avoided his gaze. Tessa, undeterred, had joined the HOA newsletter team, and was pushing for monthly block socials to break the ice. As she put it, people need to see each other, she told Kendrick over coffee one morning. Not just their assumptions. You think that'll fix this? He asked, stirring his drink. No, she said flatly, but it's a start. The community panel met that weekend in the clubhouse, a modest gathering of 10 residents in folding chairs, coffee cups in hand, going line by line through the neighborhood watch policy. Tessa was there, her phone still ready, though she didn't need to record this time. Inez Shipley sat at the front, her notepad filled with suggestions. Beatrice Rowan, the retired teacher who'd spoken up at the HOA meeting, brought a plate of oatmeal cookies, passing one to Kendrick with a soft pat on the shoulder. He almost laughed at the gesture, so ordinary, so human in a room thick with tension. The discussion was slow but deliberate. Someone pointed out the phrase "unfamiliar individual" in the reporting guidelines, used to flag suspicious activity. Tessa raised her hand. Yeah, and that's code for someone who doesn't look like you expect. No one argued, though a few shifted uncomfortably in their seats. They talked about security camera blind spots, the vagueness of HOA complaint forms, the ease with which anonymous calls triggered police dispatches. Kendrick listened more than he spoke, his presence enough to keep the room honest. One resident, a mother named Sarah from the north side of the complex, stood up near the end. I used to be one of those people, she said, her voice shaky but clear. I'd see someone I didn't recognize and tense up. I'd assume my discomfort meant danger. I'm sorry for that. Kendrick met her eyes across the room. He didn't nod or clap, but he heard her. It was enough for now. The panel wasn't a cure, but it was a crack in the system, a small shift in a place that had thrived on unspoken rules. Outside the meetings, though, resistance lingered. A few residents skipped the gatherings, their absence louder than their presence would have been. The HOA private Facebook group buzzed with passive-aggressive posts. Some people are just stirring the pot. Why can't we go back to normal? One rumor claimed Kendrick was planning to sue the HOA, which wasn't true but spoke to the fear he'd stirred. He wasn't chasing lawsuits. He was chasing clarity, the simple right to exist without justifying his presence. On Sunday morning, a week after the meeting, Kendrick returned to the pool. Same chair, same thermos, same book. No patrol cars crept by, no neighbors stared too long. A boy from 2 units down waved, his grin wide and unburdened. Bruno, snoozing under the umbrella, lifted one ear before drifting back to sleep. Alina joined him later, still in her scrubs from the night shift, her coffee steaming in the morning air. Looks peaceful, she said, settling into the chair beside him. For now, Kendrick replied, his eyes on the water. She sipped her drink, sunglasses hiding her tired eyes. You change things, maybe a little, still counts. He glanced around. No tension, no whispers, just a quiet morning. Inez walked by, her steps slow but purposeful, working on those updates. She called out, should have new drafts by next week. Kendrick nodded, polite but guarded, appreciate it. It wasn't over. It might never be, but something had shifted, not in a loud, viral way, but in the quiet moments that mattered. Beatrice Rowan's voice at the meeting, Tessa's steady hand on her phone, Sarah's apology. They were small acts, but they carried weight. Kendrick felt it, the subtle difference between being seen and being watched. A month later, a letter arrived from the Marietta Police Department, a plain envelope with no fanfare. Kendrick read it twice, standing in his kitchen with Bruno sprawled nearby. The internal investigation had concluded. Officer Trent Halley received a formal reprimand for failure to de-escalate. Corporal Bryce Fenwick was placed on extended unpaid leave with mandatory retraining. No criminal charges, no resignations, no neatly wrapped justice. But it was something. Kendrick folded the letter and slipped it into a drawer beside the sink. He didn't feel vindicated or triumphant, just present, breathing in a space that felt a little more his. Later that afternoon, he ran into Mr. Fry near the mailboxes. They let the younger one off easy. Fry said, frowning. Kendrick nodded, yeah, but they didn't pretend it didn't happen. That's new. Fry glanced around, his voice low. Used to be folks like us couldn't even get a meeting. Now we've got one. Let's see what we do with it, Kendrick said, his tone steady but resolute. As summer faded into early fall, Crestwood changed, not dramatically, but enough. The community panel kept meeting, rewriting the neighborhood watch policy to require visual confirmation before police dispatches. They added a line to the HOA bylaws banning racial profiling under the guise of security concerns. Small changes, big meaning. More residents showed up to the meetings, not just to talk, but to listen. Tessa's block socials drew crowds, hesitant at first, but growing. Kendrick stayed quieter, writing in his journal, reflections on suspicion, on Bruno's goofy grin, on his father's lessons about invisible lines. One piece, The Chair by the Pool, made it into a small Atlanta magazine, submitted by Tasha without his knowledge. It was 900 words, raw and unpolished, but it resonated. The magazine sent a check, small but symbolic. Kendrick pinned it to his fridge, a reminder of what speaking up could mean. One Saturday, as he walked Bruno past the clubhouse, a new family moved in. A young couple, Nathan and Callie, with 2 kids. Nathan looked up, saw Kendrick, and smiled. "You from around here?" "Yeah," Kendrick said. "Right over in 412B. "Cool," Nathan replied. "Just moved in. I'm Nathan. This is Callie. Welcome," Kendrick said. "You picked a good spot." The exchange was simple, uneventful. No hesitation, no stares, just neighbors. Later, at home, Kendrick stood by his sliding glass door, looking out at the courtyard. The view was the same, but it felt different. He wasn't just existing anymore. He belonged. Not because he'd proved anything or won a fight, but because he'd held his ground and others had stood with him. Tessa's video, Inez's nod, Beatrice's cookies, Sarah's apology. They weren't headlines or victories. They were moments, small and real, that made the world a little less heavy. Kendrick let Bruno off the leash and stepped onto the balcony. The sky was clear, the air cool. Somewhere in the distance, a dog barked and a porch light flickered on. Crestwood wasn't perfect. It never would be, but it was changing, one crack at a time. And for the first time in a long while, Kendrick felt like he could breathe without bracing for the next alarm.
If you liked this story, please like, subscribe, and share it with others so they can learn something from it too.